Are you recording?
Good to go.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, everybody. As people start coming into the webinar today, just like to tell you a little bit more about who Digital Resilience is. Digital Resilience is a cybersecurity company that specializes in delivering cyber resilience solutions that ensure businesses' continuity in face-to-face adverse cyber threats. You know, Digital Resilience interlocks the best in the class IT, network, and behavioral security, you know, the people aspect, to form an armory of digital security assurances. And today on our webinar that we're hosting is Brandon. Brandon is the CEO of Digital Resilience, as well as the group CIO, as well as, but wait, there's more, a member of the board and of directors of the DSG group, as well as a number of other functions. He might not give coffee though, but Brandon has accumulated over 20 years of experience in the variety of contact center management, leadership disciplines. He has a deep passion for strategic management and remains accountable and responsible for strategic development, financial performance, growth, day-to-day operational management, and the customer experience group contact center that has grown and accelerated to 445 seats. In other words, like real job creation context. And then we also coupled with David, who is from Chile, Canada at the moment. So we were just talking before the session how cool it's getting. Here in South Africa, we're getting warmer, and in Canada, they're getting to the 0 level. So David is the co-founder and CEO of Beauceron Security, an Atlantic Canadian scale-up that serves more than 625 clients across North America, Europe, Africa, and over 650,000 end users. Beauceron's innovative approach to cybersecurity and awareness is the risk management, empowers everybody within the organization to know more, care more, and their key role in protecting the organization from cyber attacks. So welcome, Brandon and David. Over to you.
Excellent, thank you. David, again, thank you for making the time today. I know it's fresh and early this morning. For us, it's late sort of afternoon, so thank you and welcome. I think just a quick summary around Digital Resilience. You know, we were formed effectively as an organization that would manage the cyber resilience, and I think Nadine has touched on it. David, just as a cursor, David is one of our strategic partners, has been for the better part of almost 2 years. And we've grown quite fundamentally locally with Beauceron Security. I think the key, though, in terms of summarizing DSG or Digital Resilience, we form part of the Digital Solutions Group, and effectively we provide enterprise SMEs with the ability to manage risk. And I think the key here is that we talk to 3 sort of components. We talk to proactive security, where we believe Beauceron Security remains best in class. We talk to the ability to drive education and awareness, the ability to manage risk, the ability to understand and educate, and more importantly, to reward the behavior that you're looking for based on the drive that you'll see through Beauceron. We talk to active security. We have a number of solutions in that active security space, where you talk to kind of making sure that you're monitoring should something occur. And then we talk to that end piece, which is, right, something's occurred, we have a breach now, what do we do? So I think in our world, for us, the proactive side is really key. And I think today's session, we're very excited to have David share with us some key information around, do we believe anti-phishing programs work? I think it's controversial. And knowing David, you'll probably lead us through the controversial discussion. Again, welcome, and we look forward to you presenting this today.
Thank you so much, Brandon, and thank you to Digital Resilience for the opportunity once again to talk to folks around the world and particularly in South Africa. So a little bit more about Beauceron. You know, we'll get into this a bit later in the presentation, but a Beauceron, for those who aren't familiar, is a sheepdog from northern France, and we named our company after a sheepdog in honor of the effect that we harness within organizations. That is, turning people from the passive victims of cybercrime into the active defenders, from the sheep to the sheepdogs. And we do that through an automated software as a service platform that enables people to know more and, as noted earlier, most importantly, care more about their role in protecting their organization from cyber attacks. And we do this with a positive approach to cybersecurity awareness and training that focuses on education and behavior change. And we empower people to care more, to recognize that risk, and to do more. We serve more than 35 financial institutions, including 2 of Canada's largest banks, 13 banks in the United States, and 47 Canadian credit unions and climbing. But we have customers in nearly every vertical you can imagine. We have more than 650 customers worldwide, 600,000 plus users. And we, of course, also walk the walk. We are an ISO 27001 certified company. We also believe that great companies are based on their people. We're proud to be employers of diversity, and we were acknowledged as one of the CyberTech 100 this year for the sort of most innovative companies in the financial services space with cybersecurity solutions. And we'll go to the next slide. So you saw this a little bit earlier, but I describe myself as an accidental cybersecurity professional. I've been a Canadian Forces soldier. I'm a proud ex-tank driver. I have also been a newspaper reporter. I've been a marketer for my university. And on Mother's Day 2012, my university got hacked where I was working running the website. And I raised the alarm to my friends in the IT department, rolled up my sleeves, and used skills that I had from journalism and from the military to help do what I now call incident response. And afterwards, the CIO asked me to build the cybersecurity program to become a credentialed cybersecurity professional, certified information security manager. And I had 5 years of amazing experiences trying to protect a 3,000 employee and 15,000 student institution from every attack you could imagine. And what I learned is that cyber is more about people, process, and culture than it ever is about technology alone. You absolutely need technology to accomplish key control objectives. But when you create a culture of security in an organization, you foster that proactive element that Brandon was talking about so much earlier. And, you know, in cyber, we tend to steal a lot of analogies from the military. And one of the analogies that I think is really important is this one called left and right of boom. That is, it's easier to prevent and avoid an explosion, a nasty situation, than it gets so much harder when things are after the explosion. And the work that we're going to talk about today are all things you can do to lower the probability of a negative impact because of a phishing attack, or even if one happens, the impact of that attack because the speed of your response can be so dramatically improved. We'll go to the next slide. So there are 3 typical criticisms that I see regularly repeated in the media and sometimes among security professionals about anti-phishing education programs. The first criticism is that they don't reduce click rates to 0. The second criticism is that they can have a negative emotional experience for employees and they can cause more harm than they do good. And finally, there's a bias towards technological solutions. Surely the latest artificial intelligence powered email filter gateway can solve this problem once and for all. And we're going to dive deeper into each of these particular criticisms and why you can create an effective phishing program that addresses these as we go through the presentation. And to top off the end of the presentation, I'm going to support some of the things that we're going to talk about with grounded academic research from around the world. So let's start with first the myth of 0%. The reality is a really good anti-phishing education program should get you to a phish click range of between 3 and 5%. That's not 0. Now, I can run an anti-phishing education program that has a 0% click rate. I could send phishes without any links in them. I could send obvious phishes. There are lots of ways you can manipulate a program to get a 0% click rate. But that's not reflective of the actual reality of the threats that the people inside your organization will face. And so you want to have a diversified program that actually represents the real risks they're facing, which means you are going to have a click rate. The goal of reducing your click rate, and most organizations who are not doing phishing education or not doing it well will have click rates in excess of 30%. You want to reduce that click rate to 3 to 5% or get it to within the area that your incident response capacity can handle. That's lowering the phish click curve, to use an analogy from the pandemic, as we've been dealing with that over the last couple of years. You don't have to get to 0. You have to get it low enough so that you know that you can actually respond effectively. Now, what does a good, effective anti-phishing program look like? We'll go to the next slide. First of all, you want to have a variety of different phishing templates of varying difficulty. And there's a new way to measure the difficulty of phish that goes beyond traditional approaches provided by vendors, that looks at the percentage on average that people click on that phish. That percentage is simply a susceptibility metric, and there could be all kinds of reasons why that template works more or less. But the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States has actually built a really robust model for calculating the difficulty of a phish. It looks at things like the context, relevancy, similarity to templates, the number of cues that are provided, whether they're technically oriented cues like the link or the sender, or they're content-oriented cues like the presence of typographical errors, or it's too long, or the types of appeals that are in it. And this NIST phish scale can actually help you understand, are we building people up? Are we helping them become more successful? Next, it's really important to use randomizations of your templates to reduce the bias of your team. And so if you can create a robust library of, say, 40, 50, or 60 templates that you can draw from, and you're sending these out on a regular frequency to your users, at least one phish once per month, randomly sent at a different day and time with a different difficulty to each user, you really will be providing the optimal educational experience that's reflective of the real threat environment and giving people a chance to learn. A side benefit of the monthly randomized phishing program, and we've seen all kinds of examples where organizations just do phishing once a year as part of a pen test engagement, or maybe they do it quarterly. But if you do it monthly, and more importantly, you tell your users you're doing it monthly, they remain more vigilant throughout the entire year. And so you're really going to lower your susceptibility to real attacks. And your target click rate, you want to be higher than 1% and less than 5% is a general rule that you want to aim for. Okay, let's go on to the next criticism. We've all seen the headlines. Everything from GoDaddy used a fake holiday bonus to test employees for phishing, to a bonus or time off, one sent by the Chicago Tribune when it actually had just gone through a series of layoffs, or a US-based Oregon Health Sciences. They had sent out a phishing email promising thousands in benefits to employees as part of the pandemic. These phish, as well as phish involving things like romance or sexuality, these are like throwing dynamite into a phishing pond. You are going to get lots of results, but it's going to be an awful mess. You need to make sure that you are sending phishing templates that are actually appropriate for your organization's context and threat environment. And remember, phishing education and simulations are one tool that you can use in a diversified communications approach to educate employees. Just because a criminal can send a certain template doesn't mean you have to send that same template. You can do things like show people what some of these templates look like. For example, we provide education to employees about so-called sextortion emails, the ones that say that An individual may have viewed pornography and their webcam was turned on, and these can be extraordinarily emotionally distressing moments, but we can provide them in a training module, in a newsletter, in a talk that's non-threatening and not specific to the individual, and still accomplish the goals of educating that person. The reality of a good phishing education program is that it's not the hammer that you use to fix all security awareness challenges. It's a good tool, but you have to use it appropriately. Next slide, please. And so these are the kinds of negative emotions that people can experience. They can become incredibly upset. They can be angry at IT. They could be confused. And what we don't want to create when we're using phishing as an educational tool is an us and them environment where the people in your organization see IT as being out there to get them, to trick them, to fool them. They're not seeing the benefit or the reasons or rationale. And one of the things you can do right off the bat to avoid this adversarial relationship is tell people you do phishing on a regular basis and educate them before you start testing them, or at least give them a chance to take their training before the phishing simulation program begins. That creates an element of fair play. And the next slide, we'll talk about some other things you can do to counter negative emotions. So this is key to the experience we've created in our positive experience. In the Beauceron context, what we do is we create a personal cyber risk score that every single employee can see. And that score includes knowledge, attitude, and behavior as measured through things like phishing simulations. Now, when someone gets a phishing email from our platform and they click our report a phish button or use other mechanisms like forwarding it to the system, they actually can get a positive reward on their score. And they actually have to do this on a regular and consistent basis to maintain an optimum score. And this really changes the psychology of phishing simulations because you go from a scenario where people can just lose or not lose at the game that they're playing to one where they can actually win, where they can benefit. And this can be incredibly powerful when you're reporting on the success of your phishing education campaign. Far too often, we focus on the click rate and lowering the click rate as the primary success criteria in a phishing education program. However, the report rate, that is the percentage of employees who are reporting a simulation, and more importantly, who regularly report all simulations, is a more beneficial metric for your organization than the click rate. It's more beneficial because it actually demonstrates that people know what a phishing email looks like and they care enough to tell you about it. And so it's a great validation of the work that you're doing. All a click rate will tell you is that that template worked at that given time for that individual for a variety of circumstances. But a report rate is a far more positive and long-lived metric. And I'll give an example of how you can use this when you're reporting back to your community. We work with a lot of police agencies, and in one police agency, the chief noted that it was a 911, our emergency phone service operator, who had the top score for the organization. She reported all 12 phishing simulations sent that year. So in the annual memo that they sent out about cybersecurity to their organization, they talked about their click rate, how they had reduced it, but they really highlighted that they had gotten to a very high percentage on report rate, and then called out some individuals for doing such a job well done. That showed that the organization cared about security, cared about the phishing education program, and celebrated people for doing the right thing. And what's really important is you can go beyond just telling people about phishing simulations when you've created a robust reporting mechanism. You can actually find a way to report real emails to your organization. And this is an add-in that we have with our technology. And it can actually tell them when it believes it was a real phishing attack, or if it was a legitimate email sent by their organization, such as the often frustrating experience for HR employees in companies that do phishing education is trying to get employees to do the annual employee satisfaction survey can be very frustrating. But if you can find a way to tell people, yes, this was good, no, this was bad, beyond just simulations, you can have an incredibly positive impact. Finally, let's talk about the third sort of criticism anti-phishing. Well, don't we have email filtering programs to help us accomplish our goals. Why do we need to teach people when we've got really great tools in front to filter out spam and phishing emails? The reality is this. We have seen this, our vendors in our space have seen this, as have others, that secure email gateways can have a failure rate between 5 and 50%, particularly for brand new phishing threats that no one has seen before. We've seen all kinds of advanced techniques, everything from character manipulation using email standards from the very birth of the internet to bypass word matching filters, to really clever use of existing trusted email sources, like compromising someone in your supply chain to send phishing emails. The reality is a certain percentage of phishing emails will still get through. Next slide, please. So all secure email gateways, every single one, have a failure rate against sophisticated phishing attacks. We work with a global bank and they have 3 different email filtering platforms in line before email arrives in front of one of their people, and they still get several hundred really good fish on a daily basis will get by. And the only reason they know about that is that their employees are regularly reporting those emails. In fact, they have a more than 40% report rate over the last 12 months. And the closer you can get that report rate to 70%, the more you'll know the effectiveness of your email gateways and controls, and the more you're able to establish the processes to actually measure your incident response rate and your engagement rate. It's really important to stress this. It's important to have these tools and technologies. They're important. And the use of artificial intelligence or machine learning is a beneficial evolution of this technology, but it is not a silver bullet. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about the sheepdog story and some of the things that led me to develop Beauceron with some of my co-founders. When I started as the lead for security for the university, we did start an anti-phishing program, and we were able to use some of the techniques that we've baked into our platform to lower that click rate from 30% to less than 5%. And here's why it mattered. We knew that our secure email gateway at the time had about a 5% leakage rate. Now, when we regularly got hit with 120,000 malicious emails with ransomware attachments in 1 month, that 5% rate was significant, but it was nowhere near as significant as what happened after another Canadian university paid a ransom in 2016 to an international cybercrime gang. What happened after they paid the ransom is it became open season on all universities, and all gangs leaned into the opportunity. And we saw our rate of malicious emails go from 120,000 to 1.2 million. Now, our leakage rate or failure rate was still that 5%, but 5% of 1.2 million is a much larger number than 5% of 120,000. But here's what happened next. Because we had lowered our click rate and because we had increased our report rate, we didn't suffer a catastrophic incident as a result of phishing email delivery of ransomware. We were able to avoid that by having that proactive element into our culture baked, working to support our technology and close the gaps. And that's the real power of that sheepdog effect, when your community can help protect your organization and amplify the effectiveness of your security controls. It's similar to this. When you're driving and you're driving on a busy highway, it's a good idea to wear your seatbelt, to have features like airbags, not because you can just be careless while you're driving, but because if even while you're being careful, something bad still happens, it can save your life. That's how we have to view technology controls, not as the primary control, but as the airbags and seatbelts supporting responsible drivers. Next slide, please. So there are 3 key metrics that I really want you to know about when you're measuring the effectiveness of your phishing education campaign. We've talked a lot about click rate, so I won't dwell there. I've mentioned report rate and why it's the most powerful metric of the Trinity, but the third is the ignore rate. An ignore rate is a new metric that we've put forward. It is, simply put, the difference between the click rate and the report rate. It's the percentage of users who deleted the email without reporting it. They didn't interact with it, so they didn't fail from it, but they didn't do the positive thing. And that's a loss for the organization. You want to lower that ignore rate, you want to increase the report rate, and you want to decrease the click rate. And let's take a look at how the approach that I've mentioned, that monthly randomized phishing, over a long period of time, gradually increasing the difficulty using the gamification elements of a score, affected how people performed. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is the result of more than 3 million phishes sent to 300 plus organizations over a 2-year period that we analyzed. Now, month 0 represents pre-onboarding to Beauceron, where our studies and others from around the world put that click rate for an untrained population or an unengaged population at between 30 and 35%. And you can see right off the bat, through the efforts that we do, we actually drop that click rate to less than 5%, which is an 8 times reduction in risk in the first 90 days. And what's important to know about Beauceron is this is faster and better than anybody else on the market. And we continue to drive better results over the next 2 years, gradually reducing that rate and hitting between that 1% and 5% range, in this case, just over 3%, that we want to see from a healthy and robust program. But what else happened? Let's go to the next slide. Report rates increased. In fact, they increased dramatically in the first 90 days, but actually over the first 2 years, they're up by 285%. That's a significant improvement for organizations. And again, that target zone you want to get to for the best performing organizations is between 50 and 70%. Now, I'm proud to say that my company, and obviously we should be doing really, really well, given this is literally our bread and butter, we have a 90% report rate. But we're not the only client we have for that. We have a number of different clients, typically under 100 employees, that are in government, finance, and other areas that have highly engaged, very mature security cultures that also see this 90% report rate. And we'll go to the next slide. Ignoring phishes. So we want to see that ignore rate drop. And you can help that ignore rate drop, not just by having a platform in place, but by actively promoting the importance of reporting emails and by giving people feedback when they report real threats. A huge missed opportunity in many organizations is that if it's not a phishing simulation that's dealt with automatically, it often gets sent to under-resourced IT teams who are swamped, or security teams that are just bombarded, and they never close the feedback loop to the employee. And this can be discouraging to them. So finding ways to do that and automate that process can dramatically improve the long-term effectiveness of your phishing education program. Next slide, please. So, what are the 4 things that you can do to create a better anti-phishing education program? Put in place governance processes and boundaries. What are acceptable templates in your organization? And remember, your objective is educating people. It's not seeing how clever a social engineer you can be. This isn't to say that you can't create templates that are highly relevant to your organization. It is to say that those should be scored as highly difficult templates and be part of a progression path delivered to individuals. And you can leverage automation and randomization, as well as individual difficulty progression paths that can be baked into platforms like ours to ensure fairness and to build people up for success. One key thing about the approach that we've taken is that we start people off with easy ones, then they get to moderate phishes, and then highly difficult phishes. If they fall victim to a highly difficult phish, we reset them back to the easy level and build them back up again. Now, another approach you can put in place, and I highly encourage this, we've built this in our technology, is what we call multi-stage remedial education. That is, don't just do the same thing if someone clicks the first time as if they clicked the 4th time in a 365-day period. You should reinforce the traditional technical education the first time someone falls victim. And again, anybody can fall victim at least once a year. It happens. The second time they fall victim, you should use an educational approach around mindfulness. That is, less about the technical reasons someone fell victim, like the sender, the links, etc., and more on the language used in the message and the emotions that it was trying to elicit in the individual. And we'll talk about the research that supports this, but you can dramatically reduce further recidivism or repeat clicking in your organization by supplementing technical education with emotional and mindfulness education. If someone falls victim a third or fourth time, and generally we find this is a very small percentage of most organizational populations, you can deliver additional education, maybe you can let their manager know, but one other technique we encourage is one called motivational interviewing. That is where you can sit down and learn more about the person's job role and tools they use and expectations on them. We found in an engagement with a very large national telco that their executive assistants had a higher click rate than almost the entire population of the organization. What we learned from that experience is that the pressures of that job, of being the gatekeeper for important executives, and the expectation for timely response created the conditions where people felt they had to react quickly. And by talking about mindfulness and slowing down while also being effective at the job, we were able to help further reduce the susceptibility of that audience to those kinds of phishing emails. And lastly, but not least, celebrate positive behaviors loudly and often. Talk about those repeat reporters. Talk about the people who are really successful. Talk about the attacks that you've stopped because people have reported things. One of the telco companies, a smaller telco company we work with, about 2,000 employees, in the first month of deploying our additional add-in that can help them evaluate real phishing emails that are reported, they were actually able to take input from their employees where the employees reported emails and said, I think this is phishing, and yes, I did interact with it. And they shut down 5 real attacks. So talk about that when you're talking to people, how they're helping protect the organization, how they're being effective sheepdogs. We'll go to the next slide. So some recommended reading. This was an excellent study done in 2020, and it does answer the question, do anti-phishing training programs work? They did a comparative literature review, and they did find, to answer the question of today's webinar, yes, anti-phishing education programs do work. We'll go to the next slide. So phishing is a growing issue for both institutions and individuals, and although there are various mitigation techniques, proactive anti-phishing training is an important building block of any multi-level phishing defense strategy. So the research is out there. This works. And we'll go to the next slide. Now, another important study that was done in 2021 showed that when people are encouraged to report real threats, it actually can help the organization detect a large number of previously unseen real phishing campaigns with a short delay from the start of the attack because people are quick at reporting it. So you can use this to measure your leakage rate for your secure email gateways, and it can dramatically shut down real attacks. Again, the proactive side complementing the technology side. Next slide. And finally, the mindfulness work that I mentioned came from a research done in 2017, and participants who received mindfulness training were better able to avoid phishing attacks. In particular, improvement was observed for participants who were already confident in their detection ability from a technical standpoint, but it also was effective for those who had low email mindfulness and low perceptions of internet risk. This really did have an important impact on organizations. So another great study to reference that. So that's the end of the formal slides we have. I would love to take any questions you might have.
Sorry, just putting all the cameras back on and everything else. Very informative, and I think that I know that phishing seems to be the biggest thing. I mean, my junk, even though we have filtering systems, the junk emails and we can give you a loan and we can do this and so I think and sometimes it's even, I mean, because we focus particularly in LinkedIn, I've seen that it almost looks like a LinkedIn email, except if you actually interrogate it a little bit, you can see the email address is not correct, and hover over the link and you go, okay, it's definitely not. So thank you for giving us such insightful information. We've got loads of questions, so that's the thing as well. From Chat, we have, whilst people and organizations are investing in tools like mail security, SIEM, SOARs, and either dictated outsourced management services or internal IT services, is phishing campaigns not a bit of an egg in the face of the CIO or CTO when reaching out to more than 5% of the clicks? Without training, how can this gap be breached? And this one's for you, David.
Yeah, so phishing education program click rates are a measure in time, and it takes time to change that course. Like I said, if you haven't been doing a proactive education program, and the way that I recommend these programs work is just like a fitness regime. You've got to build up. Like when I go to do my annual 6K runs, I'm not able to run that every spring right off the bat. I have to build up for that over several months, and I try and get my time down to a reasonable time for a guy in his 40s. The same goes for an organization when it comes to exercising your security culture. You need to lay the groundwork of why phishing is a threat. Why does this matter in an organization where, keep in mind that your average employee and participant, their job is their job. Their job is not to be the security team. In many cases, it's to deliver program services, to create products, etc. And so you need to explain, this is why security is part of your job. This is how being secure can help you be more effective in your job. This is how we give you education ahead of time, and this is how we exercise that muscle through these phishing simulation programs. And particularly where you're gradually ramping up the difficulty of those programs, you may see an increase in the click rate, and that's okay. It's when you've got a very high click rate with a very low difficulty phish that you really want to lean more into this. And so it is a complex science, and it is very much like exercise in the body. You've got to measure various things and build up towards it. I don't think it's an egg on the face at all for the CIO. And I think it's really important to remember that security cultures exist regardless of whether the security teams, the IT team, are involved or not. It's a question of how you can help shape that culture and build it over time. And that positive approach can really turn things around. So instead of focusing on the click rate, let's get that report rate up there, and let's celebrate those people reporting those threats.
Very good answer, and I think that's very well said. So it's a mechanism to help the CIOs and CTOs kind of make their job a little bit easier instead of getting blamed around the exco table for something that may have happened. The next question is for you, Brandon. How do you handle privacy and avoid shaming those that click?
Nolene, that's a great question by one of our participants.
Dan.
I think the key to understand here is two things for Dan to answer you. I think when you look at it, I mean, part of what we drive is that we also manage and leverage Beauceron security ourselves. We have a massive pool of individuals where I understand they're young, they don't understand necessarily their digital life and their impact and what it means in terms of their data and what they're clicking. So when these things happen, we take them through a guided journey initially as part of that onboarding, which is as part of the Beauceron plan, and it's structured in that way so that the individual knows kind of when they exit this where they are in their mind, and also then we know kind of what risk score they have. But if one of those individuals clicks something, this is not we don't use kind of the scenario of an egg and a stick. We've got 400 individuals that work for us in one of our units. Particularly, it's more of a notification to say, right, here's a remediation set of actions that you need to take. These are the things you should have noticed. In fact, I'll give you a prime example. Last week, Saturday morning, I woke up. First thing I normally do, it's a bad habit, but I wake up, I check email, and the first thing that popped up was an email that looked suspicious. Now, that awareness and training that you go through from a Beauceron point of view eventually leads you to read the signs. I reviewed it, had a look at it, and then immediately sent that through. Now, the reality is that I could have clicked on it because it was a Saturday morning. You're not in that kind of that mindset. The reality, though, is we don't shame. What we do, though, is work with those individuals to say there's a particular score you need to achieve in terms of your risk, because that's the key for us. Is to say there may be other areas. Sometimes you're gonna click something, but the whole point is that you're learning, that you're becoming aware of it rather than penalizing you. So that's how we view it in terms of we don't shame. It's counterproductive and counterintuitive, and I'm sure you would agree, David.
Absolutely, and I think a couple of things to add in there. One of the ways that we engineer the score, which is very much based on behavior science, is that if it's the first time you've fallen victim inside the platform, your score takes a small hit. You see it, but if you take the remedial training that can be assigned automatically and you still report the email using a report a phish button, you actually get a better score than when you started. And that might seem counterintuitive, but when you realize that our first goal with these programs is to reduce the likelihood someone's going to fall victim. But our second goal, and this is one where many phishing programs miss the mark, is that if somebody makes a mistake, telling somebody else you made that mistake, creating that culture without fear, hey, I need help. That's the most important next thing. And so reinforcing that behavior. Now, we have a corresponding effect. If you click on every single phishing email we send you, your score compounding gets much, much more worse. And you will get seen by Brandon and others, and they're going to want to ask questions and intervene on that and find out what's going on, what's happening. So it's not about using it to shame people. And one of the things that we're seeing in the United States that we're trying to change the trajectory on this, but it's concerning, is this 3 strikes you're out philosophy, where for some organizations, they will fire people if they fall victim to 3 phishing simulations in a given year. And without fully understanding the full context of that person's job, expectations, etc., that can be very difficult. And so we think it's very important to learn and grow and teach people. The other thing to note is that if you have high employee turnover in your organization, you will have a higher inherent click rate. So we've actually been able to measure this, because what happens is people don't know your culture, don't know your tools, don't know the organization, etc. So, the earlier question was raised about the CIO taking the heat for a high click rate. Maybe it's the head of HR as well, if we're not retaining and keeping talent as well. So just some thoughts to add on top of that.
There you go. Shared response.
David, yeah, it's a valid one. I mean, what we're seeing is we're seeing particularly some of the context of South African organizations we're working with, where they're saying this doesn't sit at the CIO or CISO or CTO. It actually now is an HR function. So what happens is when we're advising individuals through the process on onboarding, we talk to saying that part of what we're seeing is HR saying, what do we use this and how do we use this to make individuals understand that this is part of what we call their performance contract. So it's not a 3 strikes. It's more of a, you need to maintain a particular risk score,
yes,
because it impacts your performance score. So it's kind of been blended that way rather than a locally here instead of a 3 strikes you're out kind of principle.
And one of the things you can use, depending on the culture of your organization, it may be difficult to get, still in this day, buy-in for multi-factor authentication by senior executives, either for the budget spend or the inconvenience it causes users. Hey, 50% of organizations worldwide still haven't deployed MFA. Really, really good idea. Now, what you can do with this is your people who are outside of your risk tolerance, who have those higher risk scores, maybe these are your new voluntold or volunteer group for your stage deployment of multi-factor authentication. And so you're able to deploy an appropriate security control to address your most risky users. And so you're seen as helping the employee be more successful, but mitigating against the inherent risk that they may present to the organization. This can be a good strategy to supplement. And then as you're able to demonstrate success with this group, you gradually are able to expand your MFA deployment. Same as password managers. If you can't get buy-in, and I highly recommend password managers. We use LastPass, think the world of it. So that password manager, MFA, phishing education, Trinity on the user side can make a huge difference. And the same thing, if you can't get budget off the bat, and budget can be tough, use your education program to shape the targeting to build into it, either for a POC to get your bigger budget or to do your targeted deployment with the aim of eventually expanding to the larger group.
Absolutely. I think that was a great as well, just tying in the security from your password protection as well, because that's one of the things that we actually touched on in our first webinar from Digital Resilience, and you can always go and check on our the pages to go and have a look at that. The other question that we have from Dan is, can you touch on variation to the approach when the employee could be neurodiverse? Are they are there other vulnerable populations or groups of people when you're doing these simulations?
It's a really interesting question. I have not come across or done any research on neurodiversity myself, but I find that fascinating. And I have a hypothesis, but I don't know if there's an accurate way to measure it. We don't collect any kind of sensitive information of that nature to determine that on a population basis. We use minimum viable data, so we have got name, job title, those type of things, and that helps protect the privacy of the individual. What I have seen, however, is some really interesting research that challenges the assumption that the younger generation, i.e. the millennials, are better at phishing detection and avoiding it than, say, us Gen Xers or boomers. And in fact, the research is out. Millennials are far more susceptible to phishing than Gen X and boomers. So good job for us, or at least me and my category on that side. And part of that has to do with the inherent belief in this technology, being surrounded by the modern internet versus growing up with the analog one that broke all the time. You can give technology an unwarranted sense of faith and security. And so one of the things we have to do with the younger population is help them develop their critical thinking skills and challenge how technology works and recognize it's just as flawed as the people created it. So what I have seen are some studies, relatively speaking, on some age-based demographics. When it comes to specific roles, we have seen through our research and others that people in high turnaround jobs like executive assistants face a lot of pressure. If you deal with a lot of email volume as part of your job role, it can be a challenge because your brain will go into what's known as system 1 or automated thinking mode. And what's dangerous about automated thinking mode is that it will actually tell you what you want to see, not what you're actually seeing. That's how you're able to read words. Even though the letters get all mixed up, you can actually, once you get used to the pattern, your brain will do that translation automatically for you. So the typo, for example, tell may not work if you're in full automated mode because someone might misspell Microsoft SharePoint, but your brain is going to say, no, that's Microsoft SharePoint. I've seen that a billion times. I'm not going to spend all of the energy to fully read that sentence. That's why it's really important to do the slowdown, to go into critical thinking or system 2 mode and go there. And by the way, the most dangerous time to be in your inbox is between 8 and 10 a.m. Coffee has not kicked in. You're still thinking about getting the kids to school or everything that happened the night before. Your inbox is super full. After holiday long weekends is especially dangerous. So, when you're approaching that inbox, I don't know if those on the call can remember, but the old Windows game of Minesweeper, think about each email as being that square in Minesweeper, and you're not sure if you should put a flag on that one or if there's an email bomb hidden in there. So just slow down. That's the best thing that you can do. Hopefully I answered a little bit the question, but also gave some additional context.
Perfect. I think, yeah, the neurodiverse is also then going into a little bit more of the people privacy. So it's, it has to be, we won't be able to get as much data as we want around that particular content. Brandon, here's one for you. Do you have any deployments into Africa?
We do. We certainly have a number of in South Africa and across the continent. In fact, we have a fairly large footprint with a particular bank that's in 6 particular regions. And part of that journey too is that we're able to lead those organizations through the change that you're seeing. We're seeing kind of 6-8 months in, how we're seeing the rates continue to drop from a click point of view. The other is that we're starting to see the reporting clicking upwards. So we're reporting on those trends on a cycle, and we're able to see the interventions. Interestingly enough, when you look at in context of that organization, they have a global security center. It had to be driven from the global security center all the way down across all of their footprint, 6 or 8 regions. And what does that mean? It means that we have had quite a bit of work to do to get each through its own understanding, the employees, the onboarding, etc. And we're very fortunate to have David and his team part of that journey to say, right, these are the best sets of advice. These are the learnings from what we've seen in other territories that help in terms of that process, both onboarding and then the second part, which really speaks to the journey that you start traveling. once you've selected us. So, and Beauceron. So yes, we have a few.
Awesome, well done. We have a question from Oswald. How smooth is your onboarding process for new clients?
So we can get, in fact, we had a rush deployment. We had them up and running in a couple of days. The technology is robust. We're hosted in Microsoft Azure data centers. We integrate seamlessly with things like Office 365, Google Workplace, other things. The time it takes to deploy a good program really relies on how you want to shape your program, what your year one objectives are, and what your integration points are with technologies like your secure email gateways, etc. So those are the things that take time. And where we encourage our customers to put the most thought, this is going to be interesting. It's not just about the tech. In fact, it's more about the change management, the communication strategy, and the objectives of the organization. One of the things that I want to stress, and regardless if you use Beauceron, and we hope you would, but if you use whatever, don't just take vendor content out of the box and just use it. Consider creating your own content as well. That's part of the platform that we offer. Our most successful organizations create a mix of vendor provided content and their own content to really maximize that onboarding experience. And I'll give you an example. A 2-minute video with your organization's most senior leadership or team member saying, why are you even doing this? Why does this matter to your organization? Doesn't have to be Hollywood quality, but just honest and authentic really can make a huge difference in, okay, my boss's boss's boss thinks this is important. And oh, by the way, my boss just reinforced to me as part of our regular communications, this is important to our organization. That's how you create culture. And if you can create the courage in your organization to share real examples from your own security team of where things went right and where things went wrong, it will make it more relevant. There's a dangerous tendency right now in the awareness business to head towards entertaining people, that we have to create Netflix quality TV shows to even, God, get them to want to spend that time. And what's dangerous about that is they stop complaining to the awareness team that they're bored, cool, but they don't necessarily believe that this is actually something that could happen to their organization.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great explanation. Another question.
I mean, if I could just add to that one, what we also find when you talk to that content, David and the broader audience, what we do find is where we, for example, that learning on Saturday, the team came back and said, don't click anything, etc. So what we did was we used that content because it's relevant. We made it and we drove a communication through Beauceron that said, be aware, this is what it looked like. And what did you spot in this that would have given you a signal? So because what happens is it makes it interactive. You're able to communicate and it's real. So you talk to MFA fatigue where, Uber recently, they kind of suspect there's this MFA fatigue and there's the entry point was kind of based on severe or a number of requests to gain access. What you do is you use that as information as part of your communication cycle. So it's one thing driving kind of, and I agree with you, David, here's the next course, here's the next course. The other is how do you blend that content with your culture and your organization?
Yes.
Is there we're using relevant information and driving it across the board so that everybody's aware, understand this could happen to you. And if it does, be aware. Just be aware because it's the difference that that separates between click and a non-click.
And when you create a positive security culture, the lessons that you've applied to phishing, people understand the core concepts of social engineering when they get those sketchy text messages, when they're getting phone calls, when other things are happening, they're more apt to challenge and question. And that's the culture you want to have built up. That will make you resilient, not just to clicking on links, but also those, I'm the CEO, you need to buy the iTunes gift card scams, you name it. That's what culture success looks like in an organization. And MFA fatigue is a great example. Is when people realize this shouldn't be happening and then can raise the alarm with their security team or IT team, I'm getting targeted a lot. That can really make a difference. And it is down to time, right? How fast that the sheepdogs can call out that the wolves are around can make all the difference. So the phishing program can lay the groundwork that you can then build on. But Brandon, I love what you're saying is it's so important to use multiple channels of communication. Like the most powerful impact I've seen, it was a small brewery. It's actually one of Canada's last independent breweries. and their CEO, the president, had onboarded Beauceron. In a town hall, he stood up to the group and said, I fell victim to a phishing simulation. I thought I was too smart to do that, and then I realized how tricky these can be. And he made it okay for them to understand, even I can fall victim. I need to tell somebody when I fall victim, and I need to take the opportunity to learn about this seriously. So that's an amazing culture.
Absolutely, that's awesome. So part 2 of that question would also then be that came through is most employees are also using their mobile devices. So how is this able to put the training via mobile devices, and how do we know this won't affect the false report?
So a couple of different things on the mobile device side. If you use Office 365, for example, and have the Outlook web or Outlook mobile version, our report a phish button works in that as well. We can also set up a forwarding address, so phishing at your organization. So if they're using, say, Mac, the iPhone mail, they can just forward it to phishing and get recorded. In terms of false positives on hovering over the links in iOS, for example, because it'll prefetch that, it's really important to teach people not to do that. Because you might think, well, what's the real risk? Well, if it's a Pegasus O-Day no one's ever seen before, and you're going to a website that can just pop your site, and I'm thinking risk environment here, banks, pay attention to this. You want to discourage that activity. And in fact, in the new iOS secure mode or lockdown mode, you can prevent link previewing. So that's something we highly encourage. Again, doesn't have to be one size fits all for everybody. You can teach people that link previewing is a bad thing, not necessarily force the issue. But if you've got IT admins, bank executives, or others, and you use the phone as the multi-factor authentication approval point, you want to cut down on those previews.
Awesome. We have time for one last question. A question for David. What are some of the key differentiation factors between compared to Know Before?
So you can look at the Know Before website, and over 3 months, they'll get your organization down to about a 16.7 or 17% click rate. We get it down to 5%. So we do it better and faster than Know Before. We also have a positive experience baked in the platform that was designed into it since 2017 around the risk score, and years of experience doing that, not as an add-on, as another thing bolted on to copy a certain Canadian upstart. It was actually baked into our platform. And we were the first to do automated phishing with randomization and gradual difficulty, and everyone else is still trying to catch up with that stuff. Plus, you get to work with us and the awesome crew at DSG. And it really is, it's the people and the platform combined that can create such a positive experience. And I will mention, I am excited to be joining the DSG team at CISO South Africa. So would love to see you there. If you have more questions, if you want to do even a consult on how your security awareness program is going, please do look us up. And it'll be my first time in Africa as a continent and in South Africa. So I'm looking forward to being there, seeing folks, and showing why working with Beauceron is far better than Know Before.
I think we host you as well. I think Brandon is setting up and making sure Cape Town is ready to accept you as you come.
Thank you all.
Excellent, David.
So
thank you very much.
I just want to just confirm with everybody that we are recording the session, and it will be available later on today or latest tomorrow on the DSG YouTube channel, but also we'll send you an email. So thank you very much. And yes, the next in the series is in about 2 weeks' time. Watch our socials. There you go.
Awesome.
Yep. And just as a reminder, and for the audience, 26, 27 October, we'll be at CISO Africa. So again, if you want to see David in the flesh, he'll be there. And you can pull him aside and kind of tap into his mind around awareness training. But again, David, thank you. Nadine, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Take care.